you will see a highly engineered system. Students are grouped by age, desks face a single point of instruction, and the material is delivered to the entire room simultaneously in the student's primary language. We take this structural efficiency for granted, but in 17th century France, none of it existed. Education was an expensive, chaotic luxury, reserved almost entirely for the wealthy elite. For the few poor children who did have access to charity schools, the learning process was painfully slow. Instructors taught in Latin, a language the students did not speak. They pulled children aside one by one for individual lessons, leaving the rest of the room entirely unmanaged. The instructors themselves rarely had any formal training. The man who would solve this massive educational failure was John Baptist de La Salle. Born into a wealthy, noble family, La Salle was a high-ranking church canon whose early life guaranteed him a comfortable, prestigious existence. He had no background in teaching and no natural inclination toward the poor. Yet the collision between La Salle's elite trajectory and the vast educational void in the streets of France would eventually produce the architecture of the schools we sit in today. La Salle's entry into educational reform was entirely accidental. At age 27, while studying and serving the church in Reims, he agreed to help a layman named Adrien Niel establish a free school for boys. La Salle viewed it as a simple administrative favor, but he quickly noticed the teachers Niel hired were struggling. They lacked purpose and discipline. In his first major crossing of social boundaries, La Salle invited these unrefined, poor teachers into his own mansion for meals to instruct them on how to conduct themselves. A year later, he took a step that deeply scandalized his social peers. He invited the teachers to move into his home and live with him permanently. The administrative favor had become an obsession. Realizing that he could not manage his prestigious ecclesiastical duties and the struggling schools at the same time, La Salle resigned his lucrative canonry. Then, during a brutal famine in the province of Champagne, he made his final break from his aristocratic safety net. Against the advice of his peers, he liquidated his entire fortune and distributed the money to feed the starving population. He reduced himself to the exact economic level of the men he was managing. He established a core operating principle of total abandonment to God's providence, operating the schools without any financial reserves or endowments. By liquidating his wealth, La Salle ensured his schools were no longer dependent on the patronage of the rich. He traded his social standing for the freedom to serve the poor on their own terms. With the social barriers removed, he faced a brutal logistical problem: a massive population of illiterate children, with zero budget and a small team of laymen. He needed to engineer a highly efficient system. Teaching in Latin slowed comprehension. Delivering lessons in native French accelerated learning. Next, the simultaneous method grouped children by skill level, letting one teacher instruct dozens at once. To make this viable, he required absolute silence, replacing chaotic rooms with a structured, focused environment. Realizing that the system was only as effective as the person running it, La Salle opened a training center in Reims in 1685. It is widely considered the first normal school, an institution dedicated entirely to teaching teachers how to teach. By standardizing how his teachers worked and what language they used, La Salle demonstrated that group instruction could be as effective as private tutoring. These methods, teacher training and simultaneous lessons, would eventually become standard pillars of mass education. La Salle knew that mechanical efficiency alone could not sustain men doing exhausting work for no pay. He provided them with a robust theology, instructing his teachers to view themselves as active ministers of the church. He demanded that they look at the neglected, unrefined street children in their classrooms and recognize the living image of Christ in each of them. The purpose of the school was to rescue the students both economically and spiritually. To protect this mission, he established a new religious institute, the Brothers of the Christian Schools. Unlike other orders, it included no priests. It was a community of consecrated laymen completely dedicated to the education of the poor. By framing the work in these terms, La Salle took a profession treated as low-status labor and elevated it into an act of divine intervention. The teachers were now building the kingdom of God, one reading lesson at a time. The educational establishment deeply resented these innovative free schools. Salle spent decades fighting fierce opposition from ecclesiastical authorities and competing writing masters. Worn out by austerity and endless labor, he died on Good Friday in 1719. It took nearly 2 centuries for the Church to fully validate the scale of his work. In May 1900, Pope Leo XIII officially canonized John Baptiste de La Salle as a saint. 50 years later, Pope Pius XII made a final, sweeping declaration. Because of his life and inspirational writings, La Salle was proclaimed the patron saint of all teachers of youth. The structured environment of the modern school, from teacher training to the simultaneous lesson, has its roots in this specific 17th century experiment. It remains a testament to the idea that a high-quality education should be a basic right rather than a luxury for the few.